All right, welcome back to Genius. So in the last session, we had a talk about the React and object, and you can see that that class was actually very long, and I even didn't touch it the way I wanted to touch it. But the thing is this: you could actually what you saw there is actually enough for you to build on that. Okay, although basically you might not be working with it directly. When you start using frameworks like Next.js or Vite or stuff like that, you basically will not be making use of those objects directly. But it's okay that you understand the underlying foundation of everything. So in this session, let us take a look at the React DOM. Okay, so if I go back to this our page here, you will see that we are using React DOM here. Look at it. We are using this object. All right. We're using this object to create the root of our application. Okay. So here we were using React to create elements. Okay. So we also have the React DOM object. So let's take a look at what the React DOM object is. So React DOM object is a package that provides DOM specific methods that allow React to interact with the web browser's DOM. Let me put it this way. Remember that React is working with a virtual DOM, not the original browser's DOM. Okay, so now for you to actually have access to that virtual DOM, that is where you have the React DOM. The React DOM provides you with DOM specific methods that allow you to interact with the web browser's DOM. So the web browser's DOM is the original DOM. That is the one your users are seeing. But React also has its own. Okay, the virtual DOM. React has its own virtual DOM, and maybe we would also have to make a class in virtual DOM so that we will talk about virtual DOM in its own class and understand what a virtual DOM is all about. So we will have a class on that. So the React DOM helps you with DOM specific methods that you can use to manipulate or work with the virtual DOM. Okay. It allows you to work with the browser's DOM, not the virtual DOM actually, okay? It gives you DOM-specific method that allow React to work with the web browser's DOM. So, and if you don't understand what a DOM is, the document object model, that means you're not even supposed to be in this class, okay? So in JavaScript, we have document object model. You should have learned that. It is in our JavaScript for beginners class, okay? So it is typically used in React applications to render components into the DOM. So when you want to have access to the browser's DOM, that is where you go to React DOM. All right. If you want to have direct access to the browser's DOM, remember, React has its own virtual DOM, which is not the browser's DOM. So React creates its own DOM, document object model of your application. Then behind the scene, it will not convert it to the browser's DOM. But if you want to have direct access to the browser's DOM, you would work with the React DOM. So it is typically used in React applications to render components to the DOM. So normally you can import it, okay? But in this our example, we are not directly importing it. But when we do setting up environment and setting up our development environment in React, we are going to see how we can be using this import statement. But for now, we are not importing it. So this is how you import the React DOM. For some people who know about modules and stuff like that, okay, you would understand what we are doing here. But even if you don't understand it, no problem. All right. So for us, we are not using we are not using the import to import it, and because we are not actually using node modules and stuff like that. But when we get to the session where we talk about setting up your development environment, we'll show you how we can actually have access to this using the import statement. So, but for now, we can actually have access to it using the calling it React DOM like this. Then we cannot have access to all of its methods. So when you just say React DOM, you have access to it because remember, we are using this script here. We got it. We are not using the npm module. We are not using the modules here. Okay, we are using the script directly. So this React DOM is available in this script. Okay, I hope that makes sense to you. But if you find it confusing, please reach out to us so that we can explain better to you. Okay. So directly we can have access to it here. If I go on and say, look at it. If I say console.log, if I go on to console.log React DOM, let's see what we get. It's an object. So if I go on and then click on go live, our browser opens and let us inspect our console. So you can see that we have the object here. All right. So if I open this, you will see this is an object that has functions. It has a lot of functions. All these things are functions. Okay. So we have the create portal, we have the create route, we have the find node. And moreover, this find DOM node is okay. We'll talk about it later on, Sha. So we have the hydrate route, we have the render. This render is also deprecated. It's no longer used like that. So we'll talk about it later. So this is the object. And this object, remember, we talked about object in our JavaScript beginners class, okay? So objects can have functions and properties. So, but this particular object now has a lot of functions that you can work with. Okay, it has a lot of components you can work with. And if you want to check the version, you can actually say ReactDOM.version. If you want to use any of these methods, you can actually call them. Okay? All right, so um, okay, we have this onMount component at node. This onMount is actually used to onMount. There's a life cycle of components. Okay, we will discuss that when we start talking about components life cycle. There's one of the life cycle that is called onMount. Okay, when you're removing the component out of the DOM, okay, it is called onMount. So that is how you onMount. You remove it from the DOM. So, but this is the object itself, and you will find this course, actually, these things I'm explaining, you find it difficult if you have not followed our JavaScript class and HTML classes. Because in those courses, we discussed about the DOM. So you need to have an understanding of how the document object model works. Okay, and if you have not, please pause, stop right now and go and get that course. JavaScript for beginners, you will say, or you can go and read up document objects module and DOM manipulation with JavaScript and HTML. So you need to understand those things. Okay, so now we have seen the React DOM object. So let us take a look at some of the methods that are available. Okay, so the first one is the create route. This is the modern way of using React DOM. So if you go back to our code, you will see that here we said reactdom.create route. So this create route is expecting a document, an element. Okay, now this is the root element. So this create route now is you're telling React, okay, this is where my application is going to start from. Everything I do will start from here. So this is where you see this is our root element. So we have this ID root, and when we did get document.get element by ID, this is an element. Okay, you can see it's an element, it's an HTML element. Okay, and when we get that, we are passing that element, that our root element. Where do we want our application to start from? Remember, React is made up of components, and you must start with just one component. So all your full application you will just start from one component, and each component can now have children. So you're telling React, okay, I want to start what is my parent component? Okay, so that is what we have here. So we are using this document.get element by ID to get the element, and we are passing it to this create route because this create route will be expecting our root element. So we are telling it, okay, our root element is this div that has an ID of root. So once you attach it, once you create the root, you now from the root, you now say root.render. Don't worry, we'll still look at the render. You now say root.render. So, but first of all, let us do something. You see, when we say react.create root, okay, it returns something for us. It returns something for us. It returns an object for us. So let us console.log this object and see what we have. Now, this is one of the ways you debug your applications by consoling and logging in all of these things we have. So if you want to take a look at, Sure, for me, sometimes if I want to learn something new, maybe object or function or something like that, I will just console them like this and see what they have. So this root element, this root that we have, let us see what we get. When you did ReactDOM.create root, it created something and returned it for you. So this is the object that was returned. So if you look at it now, um, we have render method around here. Render RRRP. Okay. Okay. So I'm trying to get something for you guys. You see this root, we now call root.render. Okay. And I'm trying to see where this render, because when we got this thing, we got the root, we console it, and we have this root here. So, um, okay. All right. So, in the prototype, that is where we have this render. So in this prototype, if you don't understand JavaScript object and classes and stuff like that, this might be difficult for you to get. But before you even start this course, you're supposed to have gotten to that level. So JavaScript prototype is where all your functions and methods and everything's properties are in, okay? So now you see this root has a render method in the prototype. It also has an unmount function. So this unmount function, root.unmount function, is used to unmount the component. Remember, I told you that we have different types of life cycles of a component. So one of them is unmount, where you're removing the component from the DOM. Okay, so don't worry, we'll talk about that in later sessions. But right, we have the render, we have the unmount. Render is used to render the main object, and unmount is used to remove it. Use render to bring it up, add it to the DOM, and we use unmount to remove it. Okay, so now if I continue with the create root, since React 18, React introduced the create root method for concurrent rendering. So don't worry, we'll talk a little bit about this concurrent rendering in this same section. So why did React create this new method? Because they wanted to make this create root method has better performance ability than the normal render that we have. So, but we'll still talk about that one later on. So, improving performance and responsiveness. So, create root is better. Okay. So before we used to use render, ReactDOM.render. Okay. Is it no? Yeah, ReactDOM.render. Yes, that is what we used to use. Okay. But it is deprecated now. It will still work. If you use it, it will still work, but it will not give you what you want. So these days, instead of using React DOM.render, you use React DOM.createRoot. So after creating the root, you can now call the render method on that root. So you can say, first of all, the React, let me go to code. Code will be more. When we did here, we said, first of all, we got the element, our root element. Okay. And after that, we now created the root element using the ReactDOM.createRoot. And basically what this thing is doing is that it is adding our root element to the DOM. All right. Then we now said, let me remove this console. We now said root.render. I render this component for us. When you render it, that is why we will see it on the browser. Okay. So advantages of using the create root. Number one is that it enables React 18 features like automatic batching. We'll talk about automatic batching a little bit. This concurrent rendering and automatic batching, these are advanced levels. Okay, it supports use transition and use deferred value for concurrent rendering. So basically, automatic batching, concurrent rendering, we'll talk about them a little bit, but they are advanced level. So, but for now, just understand the create root. Okay, is better. You use it instead of using the render method. Okay, so all these things I'm showing you here is how you can create React without third-party tools or stuff like that. Okay, with this you can get your React application running, and it is actually good because you need to understand what you're doing. Okay, not that you're using framework and you don't understand what is happening behind the scene. So we also have another method, render method. So this is legacy. It is no longer being used. Okay. Before React 18, render method was used to mount a React component to the DOM. All right. So, but these days we no longer use them. So there is no need. You don't even have to, but just have it in mind that we have something like this. So, but it is not deprecated. Okay. It is not deprecated. We no longer use them. All right. So we have another one, find DOM mode. This is no longer being used again. It's a method that retrieves the actual DOM node associated with a React component. So let's go back and see. Let's see what we get. When I React DOM dot find node, it was primarily used in class components to interact with DOM directly. So when you say React DOM.find node, you're passing in a class component, okay? But there's no need for me to even show you this because it is no longer being used, all right? It is no longer being used, so it is deprecated. It's no longer being used, all right? But it's one of the methods you can find DOM node. I have used it before, but I no longer use it again. So what it does is that it retrieves the actual DOM node associated with a React component. So if I can go back and show you a little bit of it, but I will have to create a class component here. I can only pass a class component to it. So I have this app.component. So that is what I'm going to render here. Okay, that's what I'm going to render here. So I'm going to take this one out and I will use the class component. Okay. All right. So if I now say const DOM node, okay, is equal to, I will say React DOM dot find DOM node, sorry, okay, it's a function, and I'll pass in the app component, okay. So this will give us, this will return, all right, this will return, will give us the node. And like I said, if you don't know document object model, you're not even supposed to be taking this class. So I don't need to be explaining it. Okay. You're supposed to know what a node is. So if I run this thing and go to the browser, I assume you know, okay, argument appears not to be a React component. You can see they are giving me one in here telling me that find DOM node is deprecated and will be removed. So you're not even supposed to use it. But the thing is that it would give you. Okay, so I think I did it in a wrong way. Okay, so I think let me bring it down here. Okay, let me bring it after I have rendered the document, the component. We still have that error. It says it's not an instance. Okay, sorry. Oh, okay. I think should take the root. Okay. I just need to debug this, but I think I should call this thing after the DOM, after I have rendered the DOM. Let's see. Okay, okay. You see, we got it. Is working, but our application is working correctly now, but unable to find node on an unmounted component. On an unmounted component. Let's check. Let's see. Let's see. I'll have to pass in the app. Mhm. Okay. So basically we'll have to leave it. I don't know where I'm having this error. But the thing is this, the find node find DOM node returns, it retrieves the actual DOM node associated with a React component. So it was primarily used in class components to interact with DOM directly. So, but these days they are no longer used. It is deprecated because it does not work well with concurrent rendering. So basically, you don't even be bothered about using it, but just understand that it is there. So we also have the React DOM dot hydrate root. Now, this was created for server-side rendering. Now, what is server-side rendering? I will explain a bit of it later on, but we will have a session where we discuss server-side rendering. But used in React 18 for hydrating server-rendered application. So what is server-side rendering? I'll come to that later. So why you use this, instead of using um, React DOM.create root, you can actually use React DOM.hydrate root, but they had their difference in when we should use them. So if you're using server-side rendering, you should be using hydrate root. But if you're using client-side rendering, you should be using create root. So it improves performance by reusing existing HTML structure from server-side rendering. So I think, let me explain to you what server-side rendering is. Remember, when we were talking about, when we started talking about React, we said that when you first load a React application, on the initial load, it will load everything, all the JavaScript, everything. It will load everything in the first load. Then when you now try to navigate to other pages, other routes, you will try to do some routing, all right? Everything will be done on the client side. It doesn't go to the server anymore. That is how React works. Normal client-side rendering, okay? So if you try to say go to /product, go to /blog, when you try to do something like that, the routing is done on the client side. It doesn't go to the server. That is how React was built. Single page application, that's how they work. But because of you might want to take advantage of SEO and other advantages, okay, you will have to do server-side rendering. So what does server-side rendering does? Now, when you try to navigate, all right, it will render React components on the server instead of the client. Normally, when you're running a React application, everything is happening on the client. The rendering of your React application, React components, everything is happening on the client. But when you're using server-side rendering, okay, these components will be created on the server side, on the server, then they will now pass it to the browser. The server will generate the complete HTML content and send it to the browser, improving performance, SEO, and initial page load times. Now, you will get to understand server-side rendering better when you take the course in Next.js. Okay, but don't worry, we'll have a particular session that we are going to explain the server-side rendering in more details. Okay, so server-side rendering renders React components on the server. So instead of rendering those components on the client, they happen on the server. So the server will now generate the complete HTML content and send it to the browser. Okay, so if you don't understand it, no problem. We are going to have a session dedicated to it. So what is the difference between create root and render method? So, but remember, I told you about if you're using client-side rendering, you use the create root. But if you're using server-side rendering, you use hydrate root. Okay. So what is the difference between create root and render? Concurrent rendering. Okay. Create root offers you concurrent rendering, while render does not offer concurrent rendering. So what is concurrent rendering? It is a feature that allows React to prepare multiple UI updates simultaneously without blocking the main thread. Now, JavaScript is a single-threaded application. Okay, JavaScript is single-threaded, so everything happens on one thread. So now the thing is this: when you're working on your React application and you're updating some states in your application, concurrent rendering, although it's an advanced feature, but I just want to explain a bit here. It allows React to prepare multiple updates simultaneously without blocking the main thread. So while React is preparing those updates, all right, the main thread is still running. While React is preparing all those multiple updates, your application is still running. Let me put it that way, okay? So create root offers you concurrent rendering, okay, which improves performance, responsiveness, and user experience, especially in complex applications. Because since the main method is not blocked during the UI updates, nothing happens. Okay, the application will not be blocked, and user experience will still be amazing. Okay, so another one is automatic batching. Okay, React Create Root would offer you automatic batching, but Render will not offer you automatic batching. So automatic batching in React optimizes performance by grouping multiple state updates into one render cycle, reducing unnecessary re-renders. Let me explain a bit here. Whenever you're working on your React application and something changes, a state in your React application changes, React will call the render method of that component. You see now when we were creating our components, we had that render method. Okay, React will call the render method of that component. So now, if we have multiple state updates, okay, in a particular component, React is going to put all of them in one batch, all the updates in one batch, instead of running those updates one by one. So if React is to run it one by one, that means there will be multiple re-renders. Okay, let's say we have 5 updates on a particular React component. So if not for automatic batching, for each state, for each update, there will be, the re-render method will be called, and this is actually it's not good for performance. Okay, but you that is running the application, you might not even notice on any of these things. So instead of running those updates one by one, we have to put them in one single batch, then run them once. And that will now mean that the render method will be called only once instead of be called multiple times. Don't worry if you don't understand this thing, it is advanced. So we will actually talk about it later on, okay? Create Root also supports suspense server-side rendering support, but render doesn't. So you can see that is the reason why they no longer use the render method again. ReactDOM.render is no longer being used. So you should be using create root. Okay. Then after you create the root, you now say root.render. Okay. So Suspense now has full support for server-side rendering, enabling streaming rendering. So streaming rendering, what we mean here is this. There might be some components now. The first time you load your application, all the components will be loaded, whether they are going to be seen by the user, whether they are going to be used. Okay, all of them will be loaded. But instead of doing that, all right, this suspense SSR support, what it does is that the streaming rendering does is what it will be bringing those components one after the other when they are needed. They don't just bring all those components at once. Normally, that is how React works. React will take all of your components and load them. This would increase the loading time. But what with SSR, suspense SSR support, okay, with streaming rendering, components are being loaded when they are needed. So they are incrementally loaded. So this improves performance by allowing parts of your UI to render and stream to the browser incrementally instead of waiting for the entire page to be ready. Like I said, all these things sound so advanced, but you get to understand them later on as we go on, okay? So we also have hydration support, okay? It is available for Create Root, but Render does not provide that. So these are the common differences, okay? Hydration is the process where React attaches event listeners and makes a server-rendered UI interactive in the browser. Okay, so let me explain this. When you're using server-side rendering, I have told you server-side rendering means that instead of your components to be created on the client side, they will be created on the server. Then once the server create that component, they will now create, once the server create the HTML content of that component, it will now pass it to the browser for the browser to display. So, but when the browser is displaying those components, when the server gives it to the browser to display, those are event listeners, your on click, on change, all those event listeners, they will not be available. So with hydration support, React will now attach all those event listeners to those components so that they can be interactive in the browser. I hope this makes sense. Okay, when these server-side rendered components are created and passed to the browser, those event listeners are not attached to them automatically. So React would attach, using hydration support, will attach these event listeners to those your components. So this is crucial for server-side rendering and static site generation. So we'll be talking about these two things in later sessions to explain to you more what they really mean. Okay. So when to use the React DOM. For single-page applications, use create root for mounting the root component. Server-side rendering, use hydrate root. All right, if you're working with server-side rendering, go for hydrate root instead of create root. So for legacy React applications, anything less than 18, React 18, you should be using render. Okay, but it is deprecated. So I believe from now on, as any application you're building should be from React 18 and above. Okay, so alternative for React DOM in Next.js. So I would also show you how you can actually set up a React application using Next.js. Okay, but we actually have a separate course for Next.js. With Next.js, you can build a full stack application using React. Okay, so if you're working with Next.js, you don't need React DOM. Automatically, Next.js handles all these things for you. So basically, this our website you're using now to learn was created using Next.js. So we didn't have to work with the React DOM like that. Next.js does everything for us. But it is good for you to understand what is on the behind the scene. Okay. So conclusion: React DOM.create root is for modern React application. React DOM.hydrate root is for server rendered applications. So React create root is for client rendered applications, while hydrate root is for server side rendered applications. So avoid using the render method, or avoid using it. Okay. So introduction to Babel. Before we end this session, let me introduce you to Babel. Okay. But before I do that, let me go and cause an error in our application. So we have this our application running. Okay. And okay, this is now, let us use this. There's something we call JSS. Okay, we'll still talk about that, but you see, let me take this, let me comment this guy off, and then let me use this one. So you can see what we have here is JSS. What we have here is JSS. This is not HTML. Okay, don't worry, we'll talk about JSS later on. This is not HTML, right? This is a JavaScript function. But with JSS, we can actually write things that look like HTML inside of it. Then React will do the conversion for us. So, but the thing is this. Without this Babel script here, without this Babel, okay, if I comment it out, we are going to have an error. Our application will not work again. All right, because we are using JSS. So application will not work well again. So if I save it and go to the browser, you see, we don't have it here. We don't have anything. Okay, sorry. I didn't even call it. Yeah, sorry. I'm not even, that's not what I'm rendering. I should render. Okay, let me take these guys off. We don't need them anymore. Okay, so instead of rendering the app component, I should render the app. The app component, that's what we have. So look at it. What we have here is the app component. So if I save it and go back to the browser, we are going to have an error. Okay. Oh, sorry. I will have to take this thing off. Okay. Yeah. So when we say text/Babel, JavaScript is going to JavaScript will ignore this thing. So JavaScript will not see it as script. Don't worry, in the next section we'll explain everything about Babel. So when I save this thing now, our code would break. We have an error. It says unexpected anchor tag. So normally in React, okay, React does not accept all these your anchor tag HTML inside of the component. So if I go back now and say, okay, I want to use the class component. If I go back and if I comment this guy out now, and I go back to using the class component. But what I would do is this. You can see with the class component here, we don't have any JSS inside of here. So, but if I render this thing, we'll still have this issue because we are still using JSS here. So I save it, okay, and I'll go back. we still have it because we're still using JSS. So in order to fix this, I would now say render app component. I'm rendering app component. Okay. So if I save it, let's see what happens to our. Where are we having this? Okay, let's go back and see if there any other place we are still using JSS. Is there any other place we are using JSS? Okay, sorry, we are using JSS here. That is the problem. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I have to comment this guy out. Okay. All right. So we were using JSS there. So for you to use JSS, you have to use Babel. So that is why I'm trying to introduce all these errors. So yeah, you see why we need Babel. So functions are not valid as a React child. Okay, this may if you return a component instead of this from render. Okay. Um, okay. So now, in order for me to get this thing right, okay, the reason why we are getting this error is because we are using JSS, okay? So pardon me to go back to use the render method instead of the create root, okay? For me to show you what I mean. So I'm going to use the render method instead of the create root. So I'll say ReactDOM.render and everything would work fine. I will give it um, I'll give it um, I'll give it the app component and then I'll pass in the root DOM. Okay, so I will comment this one out. So if I run it, go back. Functions are not allowed. Okay, so um, just give me a minute to get this right. So this render method will take in. This render method would it will take. Okay, sorry. It's not going to take a component. It will take a React create element. Okay. Sorry, it's been a long time I used it. That is why I'm not getting this right. So if I save it now, go back to. All right, you see, we have it working now. Okay, fine. So let me explain what I need to explain now. So look at it. When we were using all those JSS, all right, remember we are no longer using Babel. Okay, so this is the importance of Babel. So if you want to use JSS in your React application, you have to use Babel. So in the next session, we'll be explaining what Babel is. Okay, so but this is the reason because I was using I was using Babel, we could write JSS inside of our code. Okay, but because I was no longer using Babel, I cannot write any of this. Okay, so now, but of course, anything you say I did here is deprecated, so don't even try it. Okay, so but I'm just trying to show you, all right, if you try to use JSS, so this is a JSS now, all right. If you try to use this JSS now, if I run this code, go back to the browser, there will be an error. You see, there's an error. Our code has broken. But if I now go back and uncomment this Babel like this, if I uncomment it and then make sure that I do type is equal to text slash Babel. Don't worry, in the next session, I will explain to you what we are doing here. If I save it, go back to the browser, everything works fine. So without Babel, you cannot use JSS. If you want to use JSS, which is very, very important in React, you must use Babel. So in the next session, I'm going to explain to you what Babel is, okay? So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next session.